Almost a dozen groundbreaking new films are playing in New York City this week, welcoming back a beloved film festival for the first time since the pandemic. NTD's Tiffany Meyer was on the scene at the movie premiere of a new animation film.
The Human Rights Watch Film Festival is returning to New York after a 2-year break.
Supporting human rights, it just seems so awesome, especially in New York City too.
We're here at Lincoln Center at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, where we're about to watch Eternal Spring. Let's see who we can grab before that.
We're very interested in this film because of the artistic dimension of it.
Eternal Spring is a stunning new animation film which tells the story of brave members of Falun Gong or Falun Dafa, a spiritual practice with 100 million practitioners around the world.
It was really good. I loved how unique the animation was. You could tell they really put a lot of passion and care into it.
The massive group was tortured in China. Many were even killed by the Chinese Communist Party for simply believing in their faith.
This was like something that I've never had any information on before. People are so affected by it, but it's not world renowned and no one's talking about it. And so I just kind of want this to get out there and have people see this film.
I met up with director and producer Jason Loftus right before the movie's U.S. premiere. We talked about what inspired him to make this movie, which took nearly 6 years to bring to fruition.
Took my lead really from the people that I was seeing come out of China. And what I witnessed was people who were willing to sacrifice a lot more than I was facing in order to be able to speak the truth in the face of injustice. And I just figured if we don't do the same with the freedom that we have here, then, we may regret that in the long run. So I think it's important that we use the freedom we have to speak up. And fortunately, I think there's a lot of people who agree with that.
Loftus is also the CEO of his own gaming studio, producing video games that have grown in popularity worldwide, including China. But while producing the Eternal Spring movie, the Chinese government put immense pressure on his business, trying to stop him from releasing the film.
So the video game I mentioned was being published by Tencent in China, which is a large media company. But in the midst of making these films, the Chinese government contacted Tencent and forced them to cut ties with my company.
But Loftus and his team persisted, releasing the film anyway.
Sold out tonight at the Lincoln Center, which is really exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
I also spoke to the comic book artist behind the movie, as well as one of the main characters, Da Xiong. He's worked on big comic book projects, including Star Wars and the Justice League.
There are always people in this world who need to stand up and do the right thing, just like the sacrifices by the group of heroes depicted in this movie.
The movie has already won many awards after premiering in Canada and Europe, on its way to becoming a global success, even without the Chinese market.
Go to the theater, see this movie.
It's a very powerful story. I highly recommend everyone seeing it.
We just watched Eternal Spring. It was truly beautiful and touching. If you get the chance, come check it out. This was just the first stop on their U.S. tour, so there's lots still coming. Tiffany Meyer, NTD News, New York. As supply chains continue shifting out of China beyond Mexico, another indicator of that change may lie in China's neighbor, Vietnam. The country's exports soar as manufacturers shift away from China's tech capital, Shenzhen. According to Wind, a China-based financial information service provider, Vietnam's exports jumped by over 30% in April from a year ago. That's after record high exports in March. And the level of manufacturing interest has proven significant. CNBC cited Vishrat Rana, a Singapore-based economist, as saying that Vietnam has become a very key supply chain node for consumer electronics. According to Vietnam's official data, the country's exports reached a value of nearly $35 billion in March. Whereas in China's tech capital, Shenzhen, official data shows its exports were valued at just under $18 billion. That's a 14% drop from last year. For the first time in 3 decades, Vietnam's exports beat Shenzhen in 2018, and the difference between the two has been increasing since then. Tech giants like Apple, Intel, Samsung Electronics, and LG have started investing in Vietnam and are slowly moving their production lines out of China. Though the issue of supply chains moving out of China is far from a new topic, China's tightened pandemic control seems to have brought it back into the spotlight. But implementing big change may not come easily. Experts say the corporate withdrawal from China may not be enough to change the country's role in global supply chains. But lockdown-driven shakeups are impacting more than just Chinese manufacturing. Vacation rental company Airbnb is closing its domestic business in China. The company will be taking down its listings in the country starting this summer.
Airbnb made the announcement on Tuesday. Its business in China has been on the decline because of the country's COVID-19 lockdowns. Headquartered in San Francisco, Airbnb launched in China's market back in 2016. Citing insiders, CNBC says that market has accounted for approximately 1% of the company's revenue for the last few years. Many multinational companies operating in China are struggling, as officials in the country continue to pursue a zero COVID-19 policy, a strategy that has badly dented the economy and disrupted almost every major line of business.
With Moscow already designating the Starlink internet system a military obstacle, now Chinese researchers are also viewing the network as a possible military threat. The satellite system was launched by billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk to deliver high-speed internet to as many people as possible around the globe. NTD's Sean Marshall has more.
Chinese military researchers claim that if Starlink satellites become a national security threat, the Chinese military needs to have the ability to destroy them. The paper published last month says China needs to develop anti-satellite capabilities and a surveillance system with unprecedented scale and sensitivity to track and monitor every Starlink satellite. Brandon Weichert, author of Winning Space: How America Remains a Superpower, sees Starlink as a definite military advantage.
The Biden administration needs to drop its political opposition to Musk and just give him a wide berth to do what he needs to in space.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine showed the world Starlink's military capabilities, which had Elon Musk tweeting about his life possibly being in danger.
Musk has given 40 Starlink terminals to the Ukrainians, and in so doing, Musk has shown that it is now extremely difficult for Russia to disconnect Ukraine from the wider global telecommunications system.
Weichert's opinion is that SpaceX is the only thing keeping the U.S. in the space race with China.
So China is trying to figure out how they can deprive us of that potential advantage. And what we need to do is protect that potential advantage by saying it will be an act of war, China, if you even think about targeting those systems.
Starlink now reaches over 400,000 subscribers in 36 countries around the world, with service recently approved in Nigeria, Mozambique, and the Philippines.
To end today's episode, with tensions rising in the Pacific, we zoom in on relations between two of the world's powers and what happened to bring them to this point. In the spotlight, Australia and China. Let's go back to late 2015, when the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement first took effect. The agreement removed trade barriers and curbs for bilateral foreign investment. The same year, China took in about 25% of all Australian exports. 2 years later, in December 2017, Australia passed the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme Act. It intended to boost transparency surrounding foreign influence on Australia's government, especially from Beijing. In August 2018, Australia banned Chinese telecom providers Huawei and ZTE from the country's 5G network constructions. 2 months later, China initiated an anti-dumping probe into the Australian barley trade. Fast forward to when COVID-19 broke out in Wuhan and started spreading to the rest of the world. Not long after, former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison backed an independent investigation into the origins of the Chinese Communist Party or CCP virus, which causes COVID-19. The move angered Beijing and marked a collapse of bilateral relations. Months later, in May of 2020, China imposed an over 80% tariff on Australian barley exports. Meanwhile, ships of Australian coal got stuck at Chinese ports. Beijing ordered them to wait there for processing. But hurdles facing Australia went far beyond coal exports to China. Later in 2020, Australia's exports to China slowed. Chinese authorities allegedly instructed domestic companies not to buy from Australia. As for the goods impacted, coal, barley, copper, sugar, timber, lobster, and wine were some of the worst hit. Citing a violation of anti-dumping rules, Beijing's temporary tariffs on Australian wine soared up to 212% at one point. A month later, Australia filed an official complaint with the World Trade Organization, directed at Chinese tariffs on its barley exports. In apparent retaliation, Beijing upped its trade tariffs. It boosted temporary tariffs on Australian wine into official anti-dumping tariffs. The year before, Australian wine exports to China totaled $325 million. After the move, that number plummeted to just $12 million for close to 6 months. The situation surrounding Australian coal wasn't much better. Beijing's unofficial ban on the goods stayed in place through early 2021. Based on China's official data, no Australian coal has entered the country since December, even though China was forced to buy from other, more expensive suppliers. In December 2021, Australia joined the United States in issuing a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics. Now that we're up to speed, the timeline now brings us to the latest friction between the two powers. As of last month, in April 2022, China confirmed the signing of a security pact with the Solomon Islands. That's despite many countries fearing it could pave the way for China to construct and operate military bases there, something Beijing denies. Then Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the creation of a Chinese military base in the South Pacific nation would be a red line for his government. The U.S. is shifting focus back to the Indo-Pacific region and calling for cooperation from Europe on China issues. As Europe's biggest economic power, Germany's strategy could create ripples on the global stage. Has the country's attitude towards China changed since the new chancellor took office? NTD's Chenny Wu gives us an update on how the situation stands.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz took office last December, ending the 16-year rule of former Chancellor Angela Merkel. The new leadership under Scholz claims to emphasize a value-based foreign policy that focuses on democracy and human rights. During his first official trip to the Asia-Pacific region last month, Scholz visited Japan. He said Germany seeks closer ties with countries that share democratic values, and that it was no coincidence that his first official trip to the region was to Japan rather than Germany's top trading partner, China. This marks a shift in attitude from Merkel, who largely turned a blind eye to China's human rights abuses, prioritizing policies that benefited economic cooperation. And some members of Scholz's cabinet are pushing for an even harder stance on China. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock in December called on the European Union to ban goods made with forced labor. It's a ban that would apply particularly to China. And in a newspaper article, she called Communist China a systematic competitor and urged democratic countries to defend their values and interests through foreign policy. But that's easier said than done. China has been Germany's largest economic partner since 2015. Last year alone, the two countries exchanged almost $270 billion worth of goods. Despite Scholz's remarks in Japan, Chinese state-run media reported that the chancellor called for strengthening cooperation with China at a virtual meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping earlier this month. As of now, there haven't been any major changes to the relationship between Germany and China.
A new survey shows a strong leaning toward cutting ties with China versus Taiwan. The survey is called the Democracy Perception Index and is the world's largest annual study on democracy. It's co-conducted by the Alliance of Democracies Foundation and German pollster Latana. The survey lasted for over a month and had over 50,000 respondents from more than 50 countries worldwide. When asked about cutting economic ties with China if Beijing was to invade Taiwan, the majority of respondents from 26 countries said yes. Those countries include many of China's top trading partners, like the US, Japan, South Korea, and Germany. And they account for over half of China's total trade. That said, over 80% of Chinese respondents agreed with the statement that China is a democratic country. Experts believe this may be related to the respondents' reluctance to speak out against the government. Now we'd like a moment for another question from our viewers about why the recent church shooting in California relates to China. This man is charged with killing one person and injuring 5 others during a shooting inside a Taiwanese congregation in Los Angeles. He was once a member of a U.S.-based group called the China Council for the Promotion of Peaceful National Reunification. The group is one of the many entities under Beijing's United Front Work Department. The department is a powerful agency under the Chinese Communist Party, tasked with overseeing foreign influence operations. We get a brief idea of the areas it works on from the heading tabs on its official website. They read multi-party cooperation, ethnic minorities, religious affairs, non-state-owned economies, overseas Chinese affairs, people from emerging social classes, intellectuals outside the party, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, Tibet-related work, and Xinjiang-related work. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo labeled the department an organ of the Communist Party, tasked with co-opting and neutralizing threats to the party's rule and spreading its influence and propaganda overseas. The CCP regards this party apparatus as a magic weapon to advance Beijing's policies. Among the department's focuses, overseas Chinese work is its main channel for spreading influence abroad. That includes co-opting ethnic Chinese individuals in communities living outside China, as well as guiding a number of affiliated organizations and directing them to conduct influence operations, most of them targeting foreign entities. Some of these entities have clear connections to the United Front Work Department, while the links between it and other groups may be more concealed. A U.S. government report from 2018 stated that the department's precise nature is to seek influence through hidden connections, those that are difficult to prove publicly. The report also points out another trick the department uses. It's been known to grow Beijing's influence in circles that deal with sensitive issues like ethnic, political, and national identity. That way, the Communist Party can accuse any group or person that opposes Beijing's influence of being prejudiced